All right, today we're going to dive into something really fascinating and frankly, pretty strange. It's this text that's part story, part manifesto, and part warning, all rolled into one. This is the explainer for Book Theory Blue.
So, where does this all come from? Well, our source is a document found tucked away deep in the Internet Archive. It reads like a personal story, but woven into it is this really complex and kind of unsettling idea about how reality works. And it all comes down to a single powerful concept.
And that concept is called Unreality. The core idea here is that the world we all think is real might actually be just a very carefully constructed stage. So, how on earth does the main character, a guy named Rory, even get to a conclusion that radical?
Well, that takes us to Section 1, a crack in reality. This is where it all kicks off for Rory. It starts with just a tiny little thread of doubt that ends up unraveling his entire picture of the world.
You know, Rory was like a lot of us. He just started with that nagging feeling that the official story on, well, everything, isn't the whole story. He'd have those conversations with friends, about who really built the pyramids, or if we've made contact with aliens. And he was always convinced there were secrets out there. But it was just a hunch, really, until one specific event sent him right over the edge.
And it all happened so fast. So first, you have Rory's general suspicions. Then, something happens in the real world, a congressional hearing on UFOs. A whistleblower named David Grush gives this absolute bombshell testimony about recovering crashed disks, and even non-human biologics. Rory is glued to it. He thinks, this is it, this is the moment. And then, nothing. Just complete and total media silence. The story just evaporates.
And that's the moment that just shatters everything for him. The key thing here isn't the testimony itself, it's the silence that came after. His logic is simple. If a story that massive, maybe the biggest story ever, can be just erased from the conversation overnight, then something huge must be controlling the flow of information, and that sends him on a quest to figure out what that something is.
And that quest brings us right into Section 2, the onion model of power. Staring into this impossible silence, Rory tries to actually map out who or what could possibly have that much control. So he comes up with this model, and it escalates quickly. At the very core, you've got regular people like us. The next layer out, governments. Then a layer beyond that, the billionaires and megacorporations that influence the governments. But Rory thinks even they aren't powerful enough to literally erase a piece of reality. So he theorizes there has to be one more layer, something at the very top, an orchestrator, an extra-dimensional entity he decides to call Mr. Blue.
And this leads him to a really, really chilling metaphor that just reframes everything. He concludes that if Mr. Blue is the farmer and we're all the livestock, then this thing he calls unreality is the fence. It's the fence that keeps us all penned in, totally unaware of our situation.
Okay, so what exactly is this unreality? Well, according to the theory, it's way more than just a few people telling lies. It's a shared, collective, false reality. It's described as the entire operating system of our society, and it's being consciously managed and curated to keep everybody compliant. But how could you possibly maintain something that huge?
The theory lays out 4 main tactics. First, you just repeat the official story over and over again in all media until it just becomes background noise, the truth. Second, you make these curated beliefs feel like common sense, so that if anyone questions them, they seem like the crazy ones. Third, you push anyone who doesn't agree out of the public conversation. And finally, if someone gets too close to the truth, you launch targeted campaigns to completely discredit them.
Now, obviously, if you start walking around talking about extra-dimensional farmers controlling the world, you're going to get labeled crazy and fast. And that forces Rory to adapt, which brings us to Section 3, hiding truth in metaphor. He realizes he can't survive by just screaming the truth from the rooftops.
So his pivot is actually pretty brilliant. Instead of talking about his real, dangerous belief that the world is a controlled unreality, he comes up with a safe metaphor. He stops talking about unreality and starts talking about mysterious purple beams. Now, it sounds weird, maybe a little out there, but it's not immediately threatening. It's a code. and he gets really good at using it in the last place you'd ever expect.
So after a breakdown, Rory actually ends up in a psychiatric ward. But this becomes his training ground. It's here he learns to use these allegories to his advantage. See, he can't talk about Mr. Blue, but he can talk about purple beams. And by watching how people react, he can figure out who's curious and who just dismisses him. He learns how to use this metaphor to find other people who also sense something is wrong with the world, the ones who aren't asleep.
So when he gets released, Rory's entire mission has changed. He's not just trying to understand the problem anymore, he's decided he needs to fight back. And this leads us to our final section, Section 4, a cultural Trojan horse.
He cooks up this really clever three-part plan. First, he's going to launch his whole idea, Book Theory Blue, but not as a manifesto. He'll package it as a fictional movie project. Second, he'll use things like art, catchy slogans, and merchandise as cultural Trojan horses to sneak his ideas into the mainstream. And third, and this part is crucial, the goal isn't to preach or convince anyone. It's just to plant a little seed of curiosity.
And a slogan like this one is the perfect example of his whole plan. To anyone on the outside, "Stay purple, my friends," is just a quirky, kind of nonsensical phrase you'd see on a t-shirt. But for anyone who's in on the secret, it's a coded message. It's a nod of solidarity. It means, stay aware of the beams, stay awake.
And all of this brings us to the final, really unsettling question that the text just leaves hanging in the air. The theory suggests that art and metaphor can be a weapon, right? A way to wake people up from a false reality. But it also presents this deep, profound problem. If the control is as total as Rory imagines, if the world really is a farm, how could you ever know for sure that you've escaped? How would you know you haven't just traded one cage for another, slightly bigger one? That's definitely something to think about.